Paths are the fundamental component of everything that you'll be creating in Illustrator. Because Illustrator is a vector-based program, it relies on paths to generate shapes of all kinds. A solid understanding of how paths work and how to work with them is the basic foundation of Illustrator as an application. In this video, I'm starting with the badland_paths.ai file already open on my computer, and we're going to be working with this logo that we have on our screen. Now, before we dive into working with that logo, however, I want you to understand that all of the tools that you see up here, such as the line segment tools, the rectangle shape tools, the pencil tool, even the brush tool, are all going to generate paths in one way, shape, or form. And as a matter of fact, there's other tools as well, such as the blob brush tool and others that will also create paths. So understanding paths is pretty important. To begin, I'm going to go ahead and grab the rectangle tool, and I'm simply going to click and drag to draw a shape. Now, don't be too concerned with what your shape is filled with or stroked with. That's going to come a little bit later. But I want you to understand that when we drew that shape, we drew a path. Now, if you click on your direct selection tool, you're going to notice that we're going to see anchor points. And anchor points are the subdivision of any path that you create. It all depends on how complex your path is as far as how many anchor points the path is going to have. So as you can see, if I click off of that shape, we no longer see the paths or the anchor points. But if we click and drag to marquee one of the corner points, we can select an individual anchor point on its own. And you can even then modify that as well. If you click and drag, we can essentially distort this shape into whatever shape we want to create. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit the delete key on my keyboard a couple of times to remove that shape. Let's go ahead and draw another shape. I'm going to click and hold on that rectangle tool, and let's choose the ellipse tool. So I'm just going to click and drag to draw a circle. And once again, when we draw this, we can see that this path, which is a closed path, has 4 anchor points on it. Again, you can use the selection tool, and that's going to select the path as a whole, as one entire object. The direct selection tool, on the other hand, selects individual components of the path. So for example, if I click off of it and then I click on where one of these anchor points was, it's going to display not only the anchor point, but the directional handles that control the path. Now, you can, again, modify these shapes, so we can click and drag if we wanted to, and we can kind of change the shape of that object. And you want to be careful, because if you then in turn want to move this whole object as a unit, your best bet is to go back to the selection tool and then click and drag to move it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that shape. Now, so far, both of those shapes we created were closed paths. However, if we use a tool such as the line segment tool, and we click and drag, this is going to create what's called an open path. And an open path does not complete itself. It starts at one location and it ends at another location. However, you modify this path in much the same way. If I grab my direct selection tool and I select one of the anchor points, we can now manipulate only that section or that anchor point, and it changes the overall path. I'm going to press delete a couple times to remove that. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this logo by grabbing my zoom tool and just clicking and dragging around that logo so I can see it a little bit better. This particular logo is a good example of both open and closed paths. If you click on your direct selection tool and then we click on this path, you'll notice that this line is made up of an open path like we had drawn earlier, and it has 2 anchor points that make that path up. You can click on the anchor point and you can click and drag to extend it. I'm just going to press Command-Z on Mac or Control-Z on Windows to undo that. And the logo itself is a good example of a closed path. So if you were to click on one of these letters, you'll notice that it's going to show you all of the anchor points that make up that path. Again, you can click on any of these shapes to see how the path is composed. Now I'm just going to scroll so that this logo appears higher on my screen. And using the direct selection tool, I can click and drag to marquee the racing team text and the line below it. And then I could just click on part of that object and drag straight down to give myself a little bit more room. You can have a lot of fun with paths by experimenting. For example, I don't have to select an entire section. If I click and drag to marquee, say, the bottom half of my logo, I can then click on any of these highlighted anchor points and drag straight down to distort that path. If I press Command 0 on Mac or Control 0 on Windows and just click off of this, you can see how we took some normal text that was converted to paths and we just modified them and distorted them to create a different shape. As you can see, paths are everywhere in Illustrator. Paths are like learning how to walk before you run. Before you can do anything in Illustrator, you need this basic knowledge of paths to understand how the program works and how you can make your artwork look its best.